Most of the time I do begin with Rob, but I just want to, I guess, just start with John and watching that film. And when you see what the press did and how they framed things, and the press went on to say that the Penn State Sandusky case was the biggest scandal, listen to this, the biggest scandal ever in college sports history. John, what do you think about that? They call this the biggest sports scandal ever.
Well, I will say this, it was no question the most highly rated and best-selling sports scandal in history of college sports. And I think that was the key. Unfortunately, we had a little technical glitch at the beginning of the film. We now start the film with a quote from Winston Churchill, which I think is very apropos to what you're saying here, which is that a lie can get halfway around the world before the truth can get its pants on. And that's really what happened in this case, is that lie, as Ray talked about in the creation of the narrative, was created very early on. And unfortunately, once that narrative gets created, there's really no turning back, especially when the Penn State Board it's not helping.
A little more bass.
Well, I like the beat. Unfortunately, once that narrative gets created, it's impossible, or almost impossible, to, as the Paterno report says, unring the bell, especially when the Penn State Board of Trustees made the decision that it made. That decision, to me, on November 9th of 2011, was colossally gutless and stupid, not just because it was wrong to fire Joe and force Graham Spanner out based on the facts. They thought they were isolating Penn State from the story, when in fact what they were doing was, from a media perspective, they were branding it a Penn State story forever. And I can't tell you how much everyone here has had to work up and upstream because of that reality. I interview Jerry Sandusky. I get on the Today Show and Piers Morgan. And Piers Morgan, a guy, not very bright, but he did win Celebrity Apprentice. So he must be, somewhat smart. He can't get over the fact that Penn State fired Joe Paterno. A year and a half later, he thinks that's the end-all evidence.
No, he said that was the reason why he believed Joe was guilty, because the Board of Trustees fired him.
And unfortunately, it's going to be incredible. That's what I mean by at the end of the film, uphill into the wind on ice with lead bricks around our feet, because when that declaration was made, the media had all the excuse they could ever use to say that Joe was guilty, and frankly, I think the burden of proof forever changed at that moment. And I think that's why Louis Freeh was able to get away with what he got away with, because the burden of proof was no longer on him.
You know what, I want to ask the panel here, just, when it first came out that Joe Paterno was not charged, and if you watched that, how did you feel about that? Anybody have any feeling? Because I know when I saw it, and they charged Tim Curley and Gary Schultz, and Joe Paterno was not charged, and I said, wow, that's good.
Let me take that, John. That presentment was written in a way.
We're going to get to that in the second presentment.
But you ask how we responded. That presentment was written in a way to outrage all of us, and by virtue of including his name, to suggest that somehow he had...
No, we're saying about, how did you feel when you heard that Joe was not being charged?
But he was, because they included him in the presentment. So from my vantage point, because he wasn't a target of the investigation, his name should never have been in. So by putting his name in, they were charging him. That's the only way they could play in this case, from my perspective. So even though I was happy they didn't actually charge him, they charged him. So I knew what was coming.
Yeah.
I got a really important, I don't want to dominate, far be it for me to dominate a conversation. This is really important point, seriously, which I don't think is made enough. The reason why Joe wasn't charged, other than the fact that he didn't do anything illegal, was that from the prosecution standpoint, they needed Joe. Think about this. Without Joe, McQueary is hanging out to dry. Joe is the only, and this is why it boggles my mind that people in the media condemn Joe's testimony. Without Joe's testimony, I don't know if you agree with this, Ray, I'm not sure there's an indictment, because now they got to go with Mike McQueary with no backup.
Well,
he's not backed up by anybody.
Hey, John, you know what? And now I want to go to the presentment, because this is very important. This is Anthony mentioned. And I'm not sure if everybody realizes what a presentment is. And Rob, how would you explain a presentment?
Hey, Rob, what happened to your face?
Little bit of, I'm still on island time. I just got back. In fact, I have a question. I haven't gotten any news. Was there an election this week? Did something happen?
Did you see my photo?
Well, we hope you voted.
Yeah, I did vote, and I'm happy to see that.
Who'd you vote for?
I'm happy to see that there's going to be some support for Mr. Lebrano down there.
Yeah.
Me too.
And I think Christian Marone's comments in John's film were quite right. We're not moving on until there's some answers and the truth. But, you know, this issue of the presentment, Franco, is one that has troubled me from the very start. And folks who are not in the law understandably don't understand what a presentment is. I mean, I've had people...
Right, this is what came out on November 5th, just so you know. This is what started it all.
It's that 23-page document.
It was the glitch, remember?
It was released via a computer glitch. There's a lot of computer glitches in this story. We're going to talk about one before the Freeh Report, but it was released via a computer glitch. And just so everybody understands what a grand jury presentment is in Pennsylvania, it's not testimony. All right, it's not a brief that's submitted to court. It's not evidence of anything. It's never, ever, ever admissible in court. It's worth nothing except that it's written by a prosecutor to get a grand jury to issue what's called an indictment. It has no other side to it. So what you have at a grand jury proceeding in Pennsylvania is you have a judge who sort of oversees it, but you have a grand jury panel. You have a prosecutor. You have witnesses who are called in to testify, and they're lawyers. There is no cross-examination. There is no objection to a question that's asked. It's a one-sided, slanted document that's designed just to allow a prosecutor to get an indictment. The prosecutor himself or herself actually writes the presentment, gives it to the grand jury, and says, will you guys sign this? And of course they sign it every single time, because that's what it's intended to do.
So why don't you tell them about the Mike McQueary
Yeah,
statement and what grand jury that was?
Yeah, to give you an example of how little value anybody except in this case puts on a grand jury presentment. If you'll recall, one of the things that jumped out at me when I read that the Jerry Sandusky indictment was this concept that the jury found Mike McQueary to be, quote, extremely credible, end quote. I don't know if anybody remembers seeing those words, but I saw them. I thought, wow, that's really interesting. They found him extremely credible, not just really credible, extremely credible. Well, as it turns out, the grand jury that issued that presentment, the grand jury that indicted Tim, Curley, Gary Schultz, never heard Mike McQueary testify. Let me say it again. They never heard him testify. Yet, they found him, quote, extremely credible. Grand juries expired. The grand jury that was there when McQueary testified, their panel expired. A new grand jury was seated, and that was the grand jury that indicted. So, when you think back, how in the world can a grand jury that never saw somebody testify find them extremely credible, and at the same time didn't see Tim Curley or Gary Schultz testify, find them not credible?
Could you talk to who might have been in the grand jury room when Tim and Gary testified?
Well, certainly the prosecutor would have been there,
Right.
And Tim and Gary's lawyer, and of course Cynthia Baldwin. Just to be clear on that, Cynthia Baldwin, okay, was there as Tim and Gary's lawyer. These nonsense that's been put out in the media at times, I mean, absolute ridiculousness There is zero chance that she could have been in there as a lawyer for Penn State. It's so utterly ridiculous that there's not even a precedent I can cite you to because it's so nonsensical. It literally is a fabrication. She was there as their lawyer and nothing else. Otherwise, she's barred. She's barred from that room.
Rob, you make a really good point that people don't fully understand about the different grand juries. The 30th grand jury was the one that heard not just McQueary, Curley, Schultz, and also Paterno. The 33rd grand jury was the one that issued the indictment. I spoke to a member of the 30th grand jury, the one who was actually witnessing the testimony. And he said when he read the presentment and saw that McQueary had been deemed by the 33rd to be highly credible, his jaw hit the floor. Because, first of all, he knew his grand jury had made no such pronouncement about McQueary, and he didn't believe that at all. And he was the one who actually was there watching it. Ray, you wanted to mention?
And so, yeah, Ray, you want to say?
I just wanted to say, we were talking about who's in the grand jury room. And when you look at the preliminary police interviews before they went into the grand jury, Deputy Attorney General Janelle Eschbach is in the Paterno interview.
Penn State.
She's also in the Curley interview,
Yep.
but she's not in the Schultz interview.
Yep.
And so Schultz was a suspect at the time of the police interview. Curley was not, but then they changed their minds because that's the only explanation I can figure why Eschbach sat in on one and not the other.
Okay, so the presentment is really, in a way, by, I would guess, by the defense attorney, not really worth anything much.
It's worth absolutely nothing. For anybody to take any action based on that
Well,
And wait,
well, like-
let me just say, because I'm going to try not to be too controversial tonight. But what was stupefying to me then, and more so now, is the fact that at the time that this presentment was being considered by the leaders of Penn State, there were members of that leadership who are attorneys. So, you know, I just have to wonder.
Right, so there were attorneys on the Board of Trustees who knew about presentments, but yet the Penn State Board of Trustees, and in particular Ken Frazier, used the presentments to fire Joe Paterno. That was the reason to say he was guilty, and like that's what they based it on. And why wouldn't they give Joe and Graham Spanner the benefit of the doubt? Why would they accept a presentment that's not worth anything? And as you said, there are lawyers on the board.
In my opinion, Franco, because it no longer was a legal issue. It was a media issue. It was a public pressure issue. They were frightened. They wet their pants. No, they did. I mean, a lot of what happened here was a lot of bad luck, although some of that bad luck may have been configured by Tom Corbett and others. Obviously, Joe's last home game was that Saturday. You know, Spanier told me, and I believe he told you, Ray, that he was informed that the indictment was supposed to come down that Saturday, that last game, the day of the Nebraska game. It got moved up. Well, I wonder why it got moved up.
Okay, so
Had it happened on that Saturday, I think this whole thing changes. The dynamic is totally different.
So Rob, what I want to say, and Anthony, you just mentioned that there's lawyers on the board, but Rob, where were the Penn State lawyers? I mean, these are corporate guys. I mean, these are big corporate guys who always have lawyers by their side,
We had
right?
Cynthia.
In everything they do.
Well, they hired
Where
Cynthia
were
Baldwin.
Penn State lawyers at this?
They hired Cynthia Baldwin, so I'm not sure who they had by their side. It's mind-boggling. It truly is mind-boggling. And the only thing that I can say is their lawyers, these individuals, brilliant people, successful, many of them, these people's lawyers were not saying, hey, we're going to protect Penn State. They were saying, you got to cover your own asses. All right? They didn't care about Penn State. Some of them cared about covering their own backside. And I'll tell you, let's not kid ourselves. Let's call it what it is. Some of them had a personal vendetta. All right? We know who they are. All right? Let's talk about John Surma and his family's vendetta. All right? Let's talk about some of the other ones who had a vendetta against Joe Paterno, against Graham Spanier. We saw, Franco's information regarding budget cuts and criticism. People had personal vendettas. People had personal reasons for acting. Other people, I can promise you, people said, hey, we don't want the Merck shareholders tying Merck or U.S. Steel to this scandal. So blame it on somebody else. We don't care about anything other than our name doesn't get ripped through the mud.
Okay, let me ask you this then. Talking about Cynthia Baldwin, an attorney for Penn State. And so, as you said, who were they protecting? Because after the Attorney General's investigation became public in March 2011, some members of the athletic department asked Cynthia Baldwin if Sandusky could be restricted from the athletic facilities. They asked if he could be restricted. Penn State, athletic department. Well, Cynthia Baldwin, Penn State attorney, said that because of Sandusky's emeritus status, which was given by the university, and he had yet to be convicted, his access to university facilities could not be terminated. So here it is where she gave the okay, and now, we're in this thing about the presentment, and she doesn't want to say that she gave the okay for him to keep his keys.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing that they were willing to give Jerry Sandusky the benefit of the doubt when he was under consideration for indictment in March 2011. But in November 2011, keep in mind, I wish I had John's movie up there, where it says November 7th, where that article from Ganem was updated, and the headline said, Paterno praised. So 2 days after Paterno had been praised for doing the right thing, they still weren't willing to give him the benefit of that. They didn't know anything.
I want to interject here. I've heard that there are some who will suggest that the timing of this was orchestrated, and it was orchestrated for political purposes. Some will suggest that. If you follow the timeline and you look back to what actually happened, that weekend, because Joe was praised, politically speaking, they didn't get quite the response they were expecting. So the commissioner of the state police, a very close friend to a very highly placed politician in the state, went out on his soapbox and made that statement about morality. I'll let you try to put together those pieces, but the reality of it is that you could make a case for the politics here and the fact that this thing got leaked a week early. And I'll give you anecdotal evidence. I had rooms at the Nittany Lion Inn for the Nebraska game, and a full 10 days before, I received a phone call to tell me that my rooms were no longer available because the governor was going to attend. Now, you have to understand, historically, governors, though they were, till this last board meeting, voting members of the Board of Trustees, they never attended. Governor Ridge did a few. Then you had, Governor Thornburg did a few meetings. Then Governor Ridge brought the board to the mansion once, and then no one showed up after that until that ill-fated few days. So you had to ask yourself, well, why was it expedited? Because we had heard that originally the presentment was going to be made after the Nebraska game. Now, there was a relationship between the former president of the university and Nebraska. He served as chancellor. There were events scheduled for that Saturday, joint events. It was supposed to be a very proud day for both universities.
Hey, Anthony, now talking about the presentment, Rob, when Linda Kelly came out with the presentment, she made certain allegations that were pretty strong and really turned out to be false and really turned out to be lies.
And they're being investigated right now, actually.
Egregious, blatant lies. I mean, there were just
Prosecutorial
absolute
misconduct.
falsehoods. It is. It's absolutely, in my opinion, prosecutorial misconduct. They put in there that Mike McQuarrie testified he saw anal rape, or whatever wording they used. Mike McQuarrie's testified at least twice. I absolutely didn't say that. We know what he told his father in Dranoff. He didn't see anything at all. So, I mean, there's no way they didn't know that. But they wanted the bang for the buck.
And they also wrote it in such a way to make us believe that many events happened post-2001. I'll let Ray address that, since Ray did the analysis of chronological order of events.
Well, yeah, the whole presentment was structured, and again, it goes back to psychological. You look at it, you read about that first incident where with Aaron Fisher, and it makes it sound like they spent a page and a half talking about how hard the police tried to find these other victims, and as you know from seeing my presentation, they didn't find anybody. And then they spent about 6.5 pages, I think it is, on victim 2, talking about everything that happened in Penn State and what rigmarole that was, and that nobody did anything right, you know. And then they just go down the list of the chronology of, it's not the chronology, it's in a haphazard order. They shove victim 6 toward the back, where that's the state screw up. CYS and DPW completely blow that investigation. And CYS never even shows up in the presentment, not one time, not one, and they don't show up at the trial either. They're not mentioned at the trial. Then you get victim 8, the horrible janitor story where they're afraid to report it. So it just,
hey, you
it
know what?
cements it in everybody's head. That this
Hey,
is a
Ray, I
Penn
want
State problem.
No, like, I want to get to that janitor report, the panel. Do you think if the janitors went to Joe and told Joe what happened, do you think Joe Paterno would fire them?
No.
No,
Well,
he
first off,
fire
they didn't have,
McCary.
Joe didn't manage the janitors. That's another misconception.
What?
We thought he did everything.
Unfortunately, so did members of the Board of Trustees.
If Joe was so all-powerful, how did that guy build a baseball stadium where Joe didn't want it? Some Italian guy from New York built it there.
But if you
And
look
he
at
refused
it,
to go into the ballpark.
so if you look at it where if the janitors, and Joe wouldn't fire the janitors, but yet they use that as a very strong position against Joe.
Well,
Yeah.
that was the culture problem. We had the very bottom of the school, the janitors, you know, not like saying the janitors like beneath something that's, you know, totally wrong. But anyway, so we have the janitors at the bottom and the president at the top, and everybody's covering for Sandusky, who they all know is a pedophile. It's totally, you know, it's a ludicrous narrative, you know, and I've been around investigations and scandals for 28 years, and there's always money involved, and then this is a scandal where there's no money involved. It doesn't make any sense.
No, it was 8.3 million.
Well, yeah. Yeah, that's the board scandal.
Real quick, on the janitor situation, I find this to be fascinating from a completely different perspective. And that goes to...
John, you find everything in this story
I
fascinating.
know, it is fascinating. Believe me, if you live my life, it's got to be fascinating to endure what I've endured and all of this. But here's the deal with victim number 8, and what I think is important. There was a rush to judgment in every aspect of this case, including, by the way, against the pedophile Jerry Sandusky. If you don't believe that Jerry Sandusky didn't get a fair trial, all I need to tell you is this. In the case of victim 8, he was convicted of serious charges without a current victim, without a current witness, without a date in which the episode occurred, and without a contemporaneous report. Now, I'm sorry, that's not due process. That's absurdity. And when it comes to victim number 2, we now know that victim number 2, the boy in the shower, who was not 10 years old, he was almost 14 years old, on the day Joe Paterno was fired, he went into Joe Amendola's office and on the record, it's on our website, said, I was the boy, nothing happened, McQuarrie's mistaken, neither Jerry or I knew that McQuarrie was there that night, I was asked to lie by investigators, and I have said time and time again nothing happened, and I would never say anything bad about Jerry Sandusky. That's the boy in the shower. That was on the day Joe Paterno was fired. Jerry Sandusky is a pedophile. There's no question about it. But the crimes of Jerry Sandusky, I believe the detriment of the victims of child sex abuse, have been manipulated by people who have an agenda here, and it's important to keep that
Well,
in
let's
mind.
talk about manipulation. Eileen.
Well, first I was going to say, with the Freeh Report, of course, Freeh gave the janitors a pass.
Right, and I was going to ask you, is Louis Freeh a gun for hire?
Yeah, and if you need a predetermined report, you know who to call.
The what?
A predetermined report, you know who to call.
A predetermined report, and
Yeah,
Eileen,
there are investigations and there are justifications. You decide which one this was.
But Eileen shows that, Eileen, could you explain what you show with the three, with the FIFA and?
Oh, right, in that handout, it's a 5-page with a staple. The 3 investigations that Freeh did recently, within the last few years, and each of his clients, of course, hired him to investigate a certain person, and miraculously, they get what they wanted in the final report. And the person who was investigated, well, with Wynn Resorts, he had to give up his stocks, which I think valued at almost $3 billion, and he had to sell them off because of the finding that Freeh disclosed. And
Wynn Resorts bought them back.
Wynn Resorts, right, but only for 30% less. So then, of course, with FIFA, he was banned from FIFA for life. And that was overturned. The Wynn Resorts,
Overturned because
lack of investigation, lack of
Well,
lack
this
of
is what
evidence.
a friend of mine told me, that he took all 3 scenarios of your, showing the Freeh investigation. And he said he could interchange the names, whether it was FIFA,
Right.
Penn State, or Wynn Properties. And it was the same thing.
Well, you could say that
The same
about the
outcome.
judge's most recent analysis of the investigation. You could look at Thornburg's report and look at the judge's report, and they were interchanged because they were
Yeah,
virtually the
sure,
same.
sure enough,
Because
right.
he did the same thing.
He just, on the Freeh Report, we prepared, PS4S prepared a report back in September 2012, nowhere near as detailed as the Paterno report, but had a lot of information in it. But one of the things we've pointed out since then, since September, was Louis Freeh's investigation. I mean, people put him on this pedestal that, my God, it's the former director of the FBI. Well, guess what? The FBI does criminal investigations, okay? This was not a criminal investigation. Criminal investigation ends one of 2 ways. You're charged or you're not. There's no in between. You can't be half pregnant, okay? In a civil investigation, which is what he was doing, I mean, he didn't have subpoena powers. He didn't have certain things. In a civil investigation, lots of times, there is no definitive answer. There just isn't. Witnesses aren't available. People forget. Evidence isn't available. Instead of acknowledging that, Louis Freeh made conclusions. What he should have done would say, look, here are the possibilities. Here's possibility A, here's possibility B. These facts support A, these facts support B. He didn't do that. He started wrong. He did his investigation wrong. He did it because he was unqualified. He was not qualified to do an internal investigation of this nature, period. He'd done exactly 0 internal civil investigations of higher education.
And Rob, sometimes I think we get too deep in the weeds and the details. What I'd like is the people who think there was a cover-up here to answer one question for me. I can never get anyone to answer this question. The question is very simple. How do you have a cover-up without Mike McQueary?
Yeah.
Mike McQueary is currently suing Penn State. And in that lawsuit, I mean, he's burned the bridge as much as you can possibly burn it. Nowhere does he allege I was forced to be part of a cover-up. And you can't have, I'm sorry, I mean, I've watched a lot of TV shows. Where's the TV show without the main witness? Where's the cover-up without the main witness?
It gets exponentially more difficult to have a cover-up with each person that knows. And we put this in our report, within 72 hours of that incident in 2001, 13 people knew about it. 13! And outside of the university, they were calling...
13 people can keep a secret.
Not if they're not told to. I mean, good Lord, they must be mind readers. Nobody told... I mean, it's
Frank,
insane to suggest a cover-up.
Well, talking about that, Freeh said that Penn State officials should have, and talking about Joe, Tim, shows that they should have monitored Sandusky after 1998 incident. What do you say about that, Ian? You think that Joe should have followed Sandusky over?
Well, first of all, it's not a football coach's job or an athletic director's job to monitor criminal activity. So that would have been the job of CYS and the Department of Public Welfare, who knew the details from 98.
Yeah, but they found Jerry not guilty.
Exactly. So even if they did know, what was
found the allegations
there to
unfounded.
monitor? First of all, and then he says, that he should have alerted the football coaches so that they come on him. So I guess
You're making an assumption that he knew a lot about 98,
Absolutely.
and I'm not sure that's the fact.
Well, I showed in my slideshow that he
No,
didn't
the
know,
point-
they
no,
didn't
the
know.
point we're making is that they said that Joe enabled this to happen. Joe enabled this to keep continuing, and that Joe should have monitored this.
It fit the
No,
narrative.
Joe shouldn't have monitored this. The DPW, CYS, police, they knew about Jerry in 1998. Why weren't they monitoring Jerry? Okay, that was the thing. They should have been monitoring Jerry, but yet they blamed Joe for not monitoring
Well,
Jerry.
why do you think that would be? Because who should the media have been asking those questions of? DPW, CYS?
Second mile.
Second mile?
The governor?
Everything you
Well,
just said was 100% true, but there's one thing I want to add here on victim 6, and this is important. Eileen and I just talked about this backstage, because I think a lot of times we forget this. Had they been monitoring the relationship between Sandusky and victim 6, guess what they would have been monitoring? Jerry doing absolutely nothing with the boy for the next 13 years except getting him tickets to his last football game because his mother was flagging him down on the side
Okay,
of the
let's
road.
get to the-
No, wait a minute. Hold on. This is important. Because there was no other allegation with that victim
Right.
6 for 13 years afterwards, and they were very close.
Okay, now getting to the second mile, okay? Now, Tom Corbett made a statement that during his investigation during 2009, that on TV said that they were not investigating the State College-based charity, the Second Mile. The Attorney General, they weren't doing that. Now, as we know, Kathleen Kane was elected this past November, and so recently, Governor Tom Corbett called for an investigation into the Second Mile. So, what do you think?
It's not political, though. Only if Kathleen does it is it political. And I'm a
Right.
lifelong Republican, and it's just mind-numbing to me that people in Harrisburg think we're all stupid.
Yeah, and I mean, it's amazing how things change with that, where we just talking about the Second Mile and.
Hey, can I just add one thing? I think that it's something new that I've come across. I don't know if all of you recall, there was a second computer glitch when the Freeh Report was being released. It was supposed to be released, and they couldn't get the computer to hit on the website. So nobody had the report before Freeh gave his summary, all right? And it was because of a computer glitch.
Well, no, you didn't have the full report, that's
Yeah,
right.
well, incredibly, some documents have been recovered that show that, and they were published
Yeah.
10 hours before that press conference where they apologized for the computer glitch that prevented everybody from having the report before Louis Freeh got up and talked.
Okay, thank you, panel.
It is amazing.
But
Thank you, panel. Now we're going to have a question and answer period. You know, if someone has a question, I guess Eileen can get the mic to you. Okay, and please keep it short, as we want to get some other people in there, please.
All right. My name's Bob Corby. I'm very nervous here.
Take your time, Bob. Take
Come
your
up
time.
here, you'll feel less nervous.
I'm 78 years old. Now, I'm a victim of sexual abuse when I was 11 years old, in 1947. Not a day goes by that I don't live with this. I was sexually abused by a priest, did oral sex on me, many other things. I had a son who was also sexually abused. He died of alcoholism 3 years ago. When I was a child, 11, I cried for help silently. There's nobody to help. I was a perfect candidate for sexual abuse. No father. And the priest preyed on me. Whether it was a priest, a minister, a rabbi, coach, it's all the same, the trauma. My family had to suffer through this, and many hang-ups, low self-esteem. Again, still today, I have a man touch me. The last 6 years have been very traumatic with the abuse in the church, and to top it off with the abuse in Penn State. I'd like to talk with Joe Paterno. He was a good man, good family man, a religious man, a good coach, and a good person. My children, both of them went to Penn State. It was another time they'd met Joe on the campus. He'd always have a nice hello to them. So I always speak highly of him. And I won't question anything about whether he went further or not.
Thank you very much for that, sir.
I,
And we know this is very tough for you. And we do.
Joe Paterno, the administration literally threw him under the bus. The administration did. Penn State will move on. Get over this. I'm speaking for all the victims. We live with this every day. It's hard for us to move on. I am in therapy now, and I think I've came a long way. For me, to address this audience has been a giant step for me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for sharing your story, sir.
You're welcome.
This
Thank you.
has to be discussed and open a lot more, and this is very important that, and that's why we have these type of discussions, to have these open discussions about this.
Hello, my name is Harold Kimmerer. Penn State fan since '72, Rocco Franco Harris fan since '72, Steeler fan since '72. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here on behalf of Joe Paterno. I felt that he was a perfect scapegoat from the get-go. A man that can't talk back has always used your perfect alibi. Remind me a little bit similar to the JFK story when he was accused of many things after he died, but never while doing he was alive. Joe Paterno was somewhat similar. He was perfect for the. I could never understand why Tom Corbett, who was on the board, I understand at the time, was never more brought out to the public, brought out to the picture. He was the biggest cop in the place, not a governor of the state of Pennsylvania, but somehow he was overlooked. I just don't get that part. Governor Corbett, to me, if he's going to accuse Mr. Paterno, then he is also a big part of the accusing going around.
Well, we have to understand that Joe wasn't charged. He was charged by the media. He was charged by Frank Noonan. So that's where he was really charged. And so when you see how that start to be set up, where the media, where the judge and the jury, and convicted him.
I understand that, but I didn't understand why people were.
There is no
He
way.
should know more. He should have known more. Colin Corbett should have known just as much or more.
Well, like I would say this, that there would have been no way that Frank Noonan would have made that moral statement that everybody picked up on. Before that, no one used that against Joe. Frank Noonan would have never made that statement without the support of Tom Corbett. Never. Yeah, right.
Well, Frank Noonan was getting some pretty good beatdowns whenever he was on any of the news shows because his investigation took so long. So to take the heat off of himself, he shifted the blame over to Paterno.
Yep.
And so, and the other thing that Franco left off his timeline was that that Corbett had seen Ornato with Spanier at a game during the lead up to the 2010
Well,
election.
they were both invited to that game. They were
Dan
both invited to the
Honorado,
tailgate.
yeah.
Dan Honorado was the Democrat for governor, a Penn Stater, and both he and now Governor Corbett, were invited to tailgate. It was before the election. I know because we had a tailgate for the governor, and I brought him to the field so that he could have maximum media exposure, and then brought him upstairs to the suites. That's a Saturday I think many of us will remember.
Yeah.
Okay, next question.
My name's Tom Donchez, and
Hey,
Tom who?
Hey, Penn State. Hey, Tom. Oh, good.
I just want to say on behalf of everybody here and on behalf of all my friends, we're just so proud of how long you guys have stayed after this and how much fresh ground you've dug up and how much light you've shined on this. It makes us proud. It gives us hope. And we're a step behind you the whole way. We're going to be with you the whole way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And I want to say, if you haven't seen his movie, The Joe We Know, please go see that. They did a great job with that. Yes.
Well, I'd like to ask this question, team, and that is this, that I've noted over a period of time, people sort of in the media elite, Malcolm McDowell, is that his name? He wrote an article last fall.
Malcolm Gladwell.
Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah.
Wrote an article about how pedophilias are so difficult to find and figure out and how they groom. And I thought that was a really important point along the way. And I noted how, I'd like you to comment on this as well, where Bob Costas is and where do you think he's headed? He's generally well thought of. He came out of the box early on, very negative about Penn State, where he's at. And then the last question is it just amazes me with the work Eileen and Ray have done and you have all done with timelines and the logic of how you've analyzed this, why, folks like Don Van Natter from ESPN and Bob Costas and others haven't picked this stuff up and done something with it and start to, draw a thread through all this and pull it together. Why has it been so difficult to get anybody in the established media to accept and take on what you've found and what you've done
Well,
so
Mr.
far?
Ziegler knows a little bit about that.
A little bit. Devoted the last year and a half of my life to this. So, Tom, thanks for the question. First part, Bob Costas. I have spoken to Bob Costas twice about this on the phone. Very interesting conversations. I have given him the 3.5-hour transcript of the Sandusky interview. I've told him, I'm not a celebrity. I can get very little done in a celebrity-driven world. You are. He understands that responsibility. However, I would not get my hopes too high. I think what Bob will eventually do is some sort of a special where he tries to play the middleman. This story is just too hot, too toxic for anyone to risk their own personal stature on it, and I think that that's a major problem. As far as the rest of the media not picking up on things that we've discerned, I mean, I don't know what else I can do. I was on the Today Show in primetime on CNN waving the victim statement of victim number 2, which to me is as big of a bombshell as we're going to get here. I didn't get one media inquiry. I emailed Don Van Natter and told him, look, if you guys want the Sandusky interview, I'll give it to you. I'll give you the interview.
Hey,
And Don went back to his bosses and said, we're not interested, without even knowing what was in it.
Hey, Tom,
I mean,
and also, Tom, the media would have to admit that they were wrong. Isn't that right, John? They would have to admit they were wrong, and
Okay.
they don't want to admit that because there is a lot of information out there, as you said, that we present now. And some of them know about this information, but as John mentioned, it's still a very toxic sort of situation because of what happened to Joe. And who wants to take the blame for what happened to Joe? So it's a very sensitive situation here. Yeah, Ray.
Well, I had a writer from Deadspin contact me about some things that I'd uncovered in the case, and he said he was interested in knowing about it, and I told him essentially no, he couldn't have the story because I know that he would implicate innocent people if he had the same evidence that I had. We went back and forth for a while, and he said he didn't believe my evidence and he would publish it when he saw it. So I told him, I said, you can publish it, and that's after they make the arrests of the real criminals in this case. because then all the news cameras will be there.
Yep,
And-
get some real.
I want to add one thing, Tommy. I don't agree with John with respect to Bob Costas, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's not a show with a theme of a rush to judgment coming to the movies theater soon. So we'll keep watching.
Okay, Eileen, another question?
Next question here. By the way, this is my best friend, and we've been best friends since Penn State. And
Okay,
her birthday's tomorrow.
happy birthday!
Thank you.
You know, you want to believe that when it comes back to the children, which is really what we want to keep the focus on here, that when it's positioned, that something could have been done by people like Joe Paterno and Penn State in particular to prevent future abuse. And then you learn that the order of things actually occurred to where that case was well after. It's such a blatant misrepresentation of the truth. And it's been hard because I think a lot of people feel, God, if only somebody did something, the rest of those children would not have been impacted. And I just think that it makes me sit here and wonder, what can we as Penn Staters do to really get that truth out there? I mean, this is a great start, and that's what I would like to know from the group is, how can we help you? Because when I learned that, I thought that was a big sticking point for me, because you think of what could have been prevented.
Well-
And when you learn that that's not how it happened in the order and who's really accountable, it's even more inciting than I was already incited. So I just want to know, what can we do to get the message out there? This is all great work, and how can we as Penn Staters help you?
A couple of points to make. The first, with respect to the specific issue of the presentment, it's actually being investigated by the Attorney General's office, and I fully expect it will be handled appropriately. The legislature inquired as to whether they should be acting, and they were directed not to because the Attorney General would. So that will be addressed, not nearly as fast as we'd like, but as I tell people, the tortoise won the race, not the hare, and we're just going to have to keep working at this. To answer, though, your question about what we can do, our strength is in our scale. I've been saying this all along. We have 600,000 Penn Staters graduated worldwide, and obviously the Penn State community is even larger. In the state of Pennsylvania, you have 350,000 registered voters who are Penn Staters. Estimates are that we impact about 1 million votes. Kathleen Kane, a Democrat, won by 700,000. First Democrat, obviously, we all know this, to win Attorney General's office. But not only did she win, she won by the largest plurality ever. She was the highest vote getter in a statewide election, outpolling the president and the U.S. senator, because in large part of the Penn State community. So at some point, you're going to be called to action. It'll probably be legislatively. It'll probably be with respect to reform of the Penn State Board of Trustees. Because as the Auditor General recently said, it's not likely we're going to be able to reform ourselves. You know, it's the Einstein saying you can't use the same thinking to fix the problems you use to create them. And when you have the same people, the thinking is likely to be the same. I think the last election, while Rob was away, the last election, we had a change of 3, but we have a lot of work to do from the vantage point of how we make a difference. Because I can tell you I'm outnumbered. So to get information out, to change direction, you need to have a board that wants to do that. And we don't have that board at this time. But we will need your help.
I agree with everything Anthony has said, and far be it for me to be a pessimist. But I'm looking at Anthony. Thank you for laughing. Anthony knows me all too well. Here's where my advice goes. I mean, when I got into this, I thought with enough resources and enough energy and enough talent, we could change this narrative around in time enough for the sanctions to be overturned or something dramatic to happen. After having lived this for 1.5 years, here's my suggestion, and I mean this sincerely. Well, a lot of my efforts have been to try to correct the historical record, that somehow there's a record of what really happened here. For that to survive, everyone in this room and people like those that Anthony just referenced, Penn Staters, are going to have to tell their children and their grandchildren I mean this sincerely, your grandchildren are going to be the ones who will change the narrative of this story. And unless the truth of this matter is passed down from the people in this room to your children and to your grandchildren, it will die, because the media wants it and needs it to die. And we don't have the resources to change it in the short run. So the answer to the question is, tell your children and your grandchildren what really happened here.
And you know what, that's why we really have this program, because we want to inform people. We know we've had a lot of people do a lot of investigation, a lot of analysis, and guess what? It didn't cost $6.5 million.
Hey,
I mean, like, they wish they would've got
It's a good thing that Ray and Eileen work for the government.
I just want to get back to the original question, though, and that was how do we fix the system to protect kids? Okay, and you know, Ken Frazier and some people on the board thump their chests and they talk about Penn State being the world leader and the U.S. leader, yet they've never said one bad word about CYS or DPW here in the state. I reference a 2008 Health and Human Services report that says when CYS or DPW gets contacted about a child abuse incident, 43% of the time the child continues to be abused after the incidents. And sometimes that child dies, okay? That child is murdered, beaten to death, okay? So when we talk about what can we do to save it, well, we have to write, you know, your congressmen, your representatives, and tell them this organization is in need of reform. The head of the DPW is a woman named Beverly Makareth. In 1982, she sentenced a child to her death, essentially, by sending her back into an abusive environment. 5 weeks later, the child died, and she is now the head of that state agency. Okay, this is atrocious. So, you know, there is right now there's pending legislation. I think they had the Child Abuse Prevention Task Force that met in November. They furnished a report. I think about 20 recommendations went forward right now. So look it up, see what's on the list. And a lot of stuff is what I'll call administrative actions, manning the hotlines, but not doing anything to put caseworkers out there that really care about kids, that really want to protect kids. And that's where this needs to be. Better training, better caseworkers.
And this was, I mean, and this goes to a lot of the things we've talked about. This goes to the heart of the issue. DPW had this in their lap in 1998, all right? For whatever reason, they didn't figure it out, but somehow they expected these non-trained people from Penn State to figure it out. That's the question. How do we fix what's broken in the state government? This was the perfect opportunity, and the narrative got changed.
Hey, Rob, what was the outcome of the 1998 investigation?
The outcome was that DPW made a finding. They have three ways. They can find child abuse, a suggestion of child abuse, or they can make a conclusion that it was unfounded. They concluded that the 1998 allegation was unfounded. That means it didn't happen, period.
Okay, so I want to ask this question. People say that 1998 should have been the basis for Joe, Tim, and everybody else to make the judgment on Jerry Sandusky. So, if you base the 2001 investigation on the 1998 investigation, what would be your conclusion? And that's the answer that, and that's the question that people have to answer. Based upon that 1998 investigation, if you were sitting there in 2001, and then once again you heard Jerry was horseplaying, what would your conclusion be? But yet, they told us what the conclusion was. Louis Freeh told us what the conclusion was with that.
That's a great question, Franco, and let me just amplify it, because after speaking with Jerry for 3.5 hours and getting numerous letters from him, I now fully understand what Tim Curley was dealing with when he was answering that exact question. And let's be clear about something. 98, because I fell into this trap at the beginning of this, at first as well. Everyone thinks, well, if they heard about 98, 2001 is a no-brainer. No,
opposite.
98 works against them in 2001. In fact, you can argue...
But they told us differently.
Exactly. And you can actually argue, to amplify Franco's point, that in 2001, Curley looks at this and goes, well, gee, in 98 we had a victim. In 98 we had a parent complaining. 2001, we don't have either of those things.
You had Jerry admitting it in 98.
Right, we have Jerry admitting in 98. We have Jerry telling him in 2001, talk to the kid. He'll tell you what happened. So if you're Tim Curley in 2001, it is, as Franco says, perfectly logical. In fact, I think Tim thought he was coming down hard on Jerry in 2001 based upon the evidence that they had at the time. And that is a really incredibly important point.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't say this to you. You know, I try to read everything possible. I take my role as trustee very seriously. Probably I'm an extremist on this because I felt so strongly that our governance failed us. And in reading the Clementi report, it just struck me, something that I said to Joe before he passed away was that I thought one of the silver lining of all of this is that there be a greater societal awareness of child abuse. And we need to do a better job at educating people. Unfortunately, in the 119 recommendations by Louis Freeh, there's really not much in the way of education. We really need to do a better job in how we identify people who are among us every day. Because, you know, this is a politically charged issue. Unfortunately, our school couldn't separate due process from the politically charged issue. We should be able to, as a society, separate the two. None of us in this room feel anything but empathy and sympathy for the victims. To suggest that the Penn State community would harbor a pedophile to protect its football culture is ridiculous. We all know that. That's why we're all offended. But as an institution, we needed to say that too. We didn't know how to say it. But we need to do a better job as a society so we can have these conversations. They're not easy conversations to have, but we need to have them.
Okay, last question.
Okay.
My question is about the Curley and Schultz cases. It's sort of threefold. I'm going to ask it and then just hear the answer. A, what exactly are they being charged with, and how does Cynthia Baldwin play into that? Two, why has this taken so long to get to court? And three, what do you guys think the outcome of those cases is going to be?
Tackle that. Yeah. All right.
Perjury, obstruction of justice.
They're being charged with perjury relative to their testimony in 2011. And that testimony related to what Mike McQuarrie told them in 2000. Actually, the question that was asked of them is, what did Mike McQuarrie tell you in 2002? Which was nothing, because he actually had told him in 2001. So they're being charged with perjury from their testimony in 2011. They're also being charged with a failure to report crime, which is a summary offense, where if you are a mandatory reporter, which neither of them were, don't mistake that the law actually required them to report this. It did not under any circumstances. It's absurd that they were charged. There were mandatory reporters. Their names were Dranoff and McQuarrie, okay? They weren't Curley and Schultz, but they're being charged with that crime.
Yeah, but didn't he tell Reykjavik?
Well, I mean, that's the other thing. Curley told Reykjavik.
Second Mile.
The executive director of the Second Mile. So to the extent that Curley somehow, some way could have had some duty, he did, tell the person who was responsible for the children and, quite frankly, for Jerry Sandusky. In terms of the timing, it's...
But the failure to report.
The failure to report, they're being charged with failure to report a potential child abuse, but again, they're not.
And that was added as a result of Cynthia Baldwin's grand jury testimony.
Exactly.
They were charged with
obstruction
and conspiracy.
When Graham was, right? Yeah. Those charges are new in terms of, they didn't come out in 2011. In terms of the timing, this is a very difficult legal issue. Okay, perjury cases are very difficult to prove. And let's not kid ourselves, this is a political issue. The Attorney General is scared to death, or the former Attorney General was scared to death of what the outcome might be, quite frankly. Jerry Sandusky was rushed to trial. I think John pointed that out. I mean, it was absolutely incomprehensible how fast they shoved the trial down his throat. These two, there's a lot of legal issues, and Cynthia Baldwin I can't really say too much other than the idea that Cynthia Baldwin sat next to them, was identified as their counsel, and then later testified against them, is so morally reprehensible to me as an attorney that it makes me embarrassed to call her someone affiliated with me in my profession. So
Thank you.
there's probably a lawyer joke in there
So to
somewhere.
answer your question, it's 2014 at best, before they get to trial, if they get to trial. The issue of whether her testimony is going to be admitted.
But Eileen,
For the record, I don't think there's ever going to be a trial.
Eileen, you
I don't know about what you think, Anthony, but I believe that the prosecution is going to actually be thrilled when the Cynthia Baldwin issue destroys their case, because then they're going to go, oh, they got off on a technicality, there was no way to prove we were wrong, we tried our best, and it was just a snafu legally, and they were still guilty. That's what I think is going to happen. I don't think there'll ever be a trial.
Eileen, myself, we never thought it would go, we never
Yeah, I don't think
thought
it'll see the inside of a courtroom.
it even was going to go to court. I mean, they did not have enough, I don't think it's going to go to trial. Linda Kelly, Corbett, they didn't have enough information, that wasn't going to go to trial.
I won't comment.
Are we done?
Yeah, one more.
Hold it,
He
one
had his
more.
hand up for 20 minutes, so he's got to get his question
All
in.
right.
First off, all of you guys, thank you very much. I know you guys all have a lot of personal stake in your professional lives, and it's not easy to stand up for Penn State and what happened here. I mean, Ray, you work for the government, for crying out loud. You guys all have, lives outside of this, and it means a lot.
Not really.
Well, Anthony, I'm coming to you with my question, but it does mean a lot that you guys are willing to, put your reputation on the line for Penn State. It means a lot to, the Penn State family and community that
This
you
is
have
helping
here.
my reputation.
Anthony, my
You can't
question's,
hang out with me anymore, can you?
my question's actually for you, Anthony, as our kind of, lone board of trustees member.
Well, no, Ryan McCumbie's with me. That's not, and I appreciate that you guys thank me, but you all should know, Ryan McCumbie is an outstanding steward of Penn State, and he's been a wonderful, wonderful supporter.
Give him a hand,
his-
Ryan
his-
McCumbie.
His approach might be a little different than mine, but let me tell you, if Captain McCumbie wasn't sitting next to me on the board, I'd be
Anthony,
gone.
he has a question.
Anthony, I was just wondering if you could shed some light on how you're viewed by the rest of the Board of Trustees, particularly a lot of the incumbents. I mean, I think we all have some suspicions, but I think it's kind of interesting to hear how you have to relate to them. You have to work together, whether they like you or not, and I just think it'd be fascinating to hear what you can tell us about some of the incumbents that we know and, quite frankly, don't really approve
You know
of
what,
their
he
actions.
might have to tell you in private.
No, this is what I can tell you. Any effort to marginalize me has failed, and so and it's failed because I haven't really been concerned with having these kinds of conversations, because I think that my fiduciary responsibility is met by having these kinds of conversations. Clearly, I can't share confidential information with you, but insofar as how generally they view me today, it's also very clear that they know that I take my role seriously, and unlike trustees in the past who can't get up to speed faster than a year or two, they realize that I hit the ground running, and I'm going to press them at every turn. But they also know that they outvote me. But I recognize that I have to work with them, and I think with this election comes new leadership, because the vice chair has, she's been defeated.
That's right, talking about that, there's another election in 11 months, guys, and we want 3 new trustees for that. Okay, all right, okay.
You want to thank Dennis for having us here?
Pardon me?
You going to thank Dennis for?
Yes, I recognized Dennis earlier. Dennis
Okay.
still here? Dennis, Mary Lou, you still here somewhere? Okay, Mary Lou, thank you again. And you know what, I want to say that, that we have covered a lot. But there is a lot more to this, and I think that a lot more to this than a lot of us ever imagined. And, but we will keep moving on this. I mean, we will keep moving on until we find the truth. That's what we'll do. We'll keep moving until we find the truth. So,